Welcome back to Literature Guide. Today's video is about trilogies in English literature. I have almost covered all the important trilogies written in English literature. I have covered the famous novelists, playwrights and opera writers in this particular video. This video is also specially made for the students who often get problem while dealing with the questions asked on trilogies. I am very much thankful to the subscribers of this particular channel which is designed for the students of English literature, and I also would like to thank the people who haven't yet subscribed to my channel. I hope they will also subscribe. Almost 95% non-subscribers watch my videos and only 5% of the viewers they have subscribed to this channel. Isn't it a paradox and a shocking fact for me? The non-subscriber, I don't want to force them to subscribe this channel, but if this channel really helps you, what's wrong in subscribing this channel? We are not going to lose anything by subscribing this channel, and meet you soon in the next video.
Trilogies in English literature. According to the Dictionary of Literary Terms, a term trilogy is defined as a literary composition, usually a novel or a play written in 3 parts, each of which is a complete unit in itself. There are many writers who have composed trilogies in English literature. Trilogy is a group of 3 plays, novels, operas etc. that are usually related to any theme or a character. The finest example of trilogy is Aeschylus's tragic play Oresteia, which comprises the plays Agamemnon, Choephoro, and Eumenides. It is important to note that Aeschylus introduced a second actor to the Greek play. In Oresteia, he made use of a third actor, and the play also differs from other plays as far as its dramatic structure is concerned. Agamemnon deals with the story of Agamemnon, who comes to Argos after the Trojan War and his murder by his wife, Clytemnestra. The second part, Choephoro or the Libation Bearers, is a story of vengeance of Orestes and Electra, son and daughter respectively of Agamemnon. They murder their mother, Clytemnestra, and her lover, Aegisthus. The third part, Eumenides, tells the story of the trial of Orestes by Athena, goddess of wisdom. In the end, she sets Orestes free. Walter Pater, philosopher and critic, produced his 2 trilogies, namely Marius the Epicurean and Gaston de la Tour. They were published in 1885 and 1888 respectively. Marius the Epicurean deals with the themes of religion, philosophy and the beautiful. The second trilogy, Gaston de la Tour, tells a story of Marius's education and development. These trilogies, broadly speaking, deal with the subjects like Christian and pagan art and religion. Walter Savage Landor, poet and author, wrote a trilogy comprising Andrea of Hungary, Giovanni of Naples, and Francis Rupert. The trilogy is set in the 14th century, and it was published in 1839. Jane Barker, poet and novelist, produced a semi-autobiographical trilogy. The 3 parts of the trilogy are The Amours of Beauville and Galicia, a patchwork screen for the ladies, and The Lining of the Patchwork Screen. Anton Chekhov's trilogy comprises The Man in a Case, Gooseberries, and About Love. The work was published in 1898. The narrator of The Man in a Case is Birkin, who narrates a story of his colleague Belikov. Gooseberries deals with the story of Nikolai Ivanovich. The narrator of About Love is Aliokin, who tells the story of his own unhappy love to Birkin and Ivan Ivanovich. It is important to note that George Bernard Shaw wrote Heartbreak House as a tribute to Anton Chekhov. The trilogy is known as the Little Trilogy. Paul Auster's City of Glass, Ghosts, and The Locked Room form the New York Trilogy. The three novels have been composed in different style, and it follows the order of detective fiction. The New York Trilogy focuses the questions of loneliness in urban areas, quest for identity, and the relationship between language and meaning. Paul Auster's works has been greatly inspired by Harold Pinter and Samuel Beckett. Chicken Soup with Barley, Roots, and I Am Talking About Jerusalem are the parts of Arnold Wesker's trilogy. The Regeneration Trilogy or the First World War Trilogy has been produced by Pat Barker. It comprises Regeneration, The Eye in the Door, and The Ghost Road. The trilogy made Pat Barker famous. Her fiction deals with the sorry state of common man and social problems. It also gives a true picture of Britain and the Western Front. John Banville portrayed the three great scientists Copernicus, Kepler, and Newton in his famous trilogy. It comprises the novels Dr. Copernicus, Kepler, and the Newton Letter. John Banville's second trilogy comprises the Book of Evidence, Ghosts, and Athena. The protagonist of the trilogy, Freddie Montgomery, appears in all three novels. Sir Alan Ayckbourn, English playwright, produced a trilogy consists of The Norman Conquest, Absent Friends, and Joking Apart. The trilogy deals with the life of middle strata of society in the urban region. The work expresses disillusionment, insensibility, and misery of man. There is a fine blending of comic and serious elements. It is important to note that Sir Alan Ayckbourn is the most produced dramatist after William Shakespeare. Mulk Raj Anand, the renowned Indian writer, wrote The Village, Across the Black Waters, and The Sword and Sickle, which form a trilogy. It depicts a story of a young Sikh peasant from Punjab. The trilogy deals with the story of a man, Lal Singh, who fights in the First World War for the British. There is a description of the Indian freedom movement. The title of the third novel was suggested by George Orwell to Mulk Raj Anand. His Dark Material, a trilogy by Philip Pullman, is partly modelled on John Milton's great epic Paradise Lost. It comprises Northern Lights, The Subtle Knife, and The Amber Spyglass. The trilogy established Philip Pullman in the literary arena. The work revolves round the two characters Lyra Belacqua and Will Parry, who commute between worlds. The trilogy has been written in realistic vein. It is to be noted that Philip Pullman was greatly influenced by William Blake. Samuel Beckett's trilogy contains Malloy, Malone Dies, and The Unnamable. The trilogy is tinged with black humor, which is expressed through interior monologues. Samuel Beckett received the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1969. William Cooper, a pseudonym adopted by Harry Hoff, produced a trilogy containing scenes from provincial life, scenes from married life, and scenes from metropolitan life. Joe Lunn is the protagonist and narrator of the trilogy. The work deals with the life of lower middle-class people, and it presents realistic picture of provincial life. John Berger's trilogy comprises stories in Pig Earth, Once in Europa, and Lilac and Flag. It reflects Berger's Marxist point of view. Camille Braithwaite, Caribbean poet, wrote two trilogies called The Arrivants, A New World Trilogy, and Barbados Trilogy. The Arrivants, A New World Trilogy contains rites of passage, masks, and islands. There is a dexterous use of vernacular diction and rhythm in the verses. The trilogy deals with the theme of identity. There are also references of religious beliefs and cricket matches at the Oval Cricket Stadium. The Barbados Trilogy comprises Mother Poem, Son Poem, and Ex-Self. Camille Braithwaite's trilogies reflect the Afro-Caribbean history, tradition and culture. Derek Walcott's The Haitian Trilogy consists of the plays Henry Christophe, Drums and Colors and The Haitian Earth. The trilogy deals with the story of struggle of West Indies. It contains information about war, conquest and rebellion. Derek Walcott received the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1992. He has been considered as the founder of Trinidad Theatre Workshop. Edward Upward's trilogy The Spiral Ascent contains the works in the 30s, The Rotten Elements, and No Home But the Struggle. The work was published in 1977. The protagonist of the trilogy is Alan Sabrill, a poet and schoolmaster. Philip Taylor wrote a trilogy which comprises stories in Tara, Amara Tale, Ralph Darnell, and Sita. The trilogy deals with the history of India from 17th century. Tom Stoppard produced a trilogy The Coast of Utopia in 2002. It gained popularity in the USA than in Britain. The trilogy deals with political radicalism in Russia. It comprises the plays Voyage, Shipwreck, and Salvage. The title of the trilogy is borrowed from Road to Revolution, A Century of Russian Radicalism by Avram Yarmolinsky. Eugene O'Neill composed a trilogy comprising the plays Morning Becomes Electra, Wilderness and Days Without End. The trilogy is modeled on Aeschylus's trilogy Oresteia. Lev Tolstoy's childhood, boyhood and youth forms a trilogy. The readers can observe the influence of Charles Dickens on the work. Olivia Manning wrote two trilogies, they are the Balkan Trilogy and the Levant Trilogy. The Balkan Trilogy consists of the novels The Great Fortune, The Spoiled City, and Friends and Heroes. The Levant Trilogy comprises The Danger Tree, The Battle Lost and Won, and The Sum of Things. The two trilogies depict the condition of refugees in the Second World War. Gunter Grass, German novelist and thinker, produced the Danzig Trilogy, comprising The Tin Drum, Cat and Mouse, and Dog Years. The trilogy deals with the history of Germany. Maureen Duffy, novelist, playwright, and poet, composed the London Trilogy which contains the novels Wounds, Capital, and Londoners. The trilogy is written in satiric vein. The gender of the narrator has been kept in dark intentionally. Maureen Duffy's plays Right, Solo and Old Time forms her second trilogy. It is known as the Greek Myth Trilogy. Italo Calvino has produced his famous fantasy trilogy which contains the allegorical fiction The Cloven Viscount, Baron in the Trees, and The Non-Existent Knight. Karel Capek wrote a trilogy containing Horrible, The Meteor, and An Ordinary Life. All the three novels are realistic in nature. Herself Surprised, To Be a Pilgrim, and The Horse's Mouth form a trilogy by Joyce Carey. Gully Jimson is a protagonist of the trilogy. Joyce Carey's second trilogy comprises Prisoner of Grace, Except the Lord, and Not on a Moor. It deals with a theme of politics. The Military Orchid, A Mine of Serpents and The Goose Cathedral form a semi-autobiographical trilogy of Jocelyn Brooke. Anthony Burgess produced the Malayan Trilogy which comprises his novels Time for a Tiger, The Enemy in the Blanket, and Beds in the East. It was published in 1972. Liud, Rome and Paris constitute the trilogy of Émile Zola. William Burroughs' The Nova Trilogy comprises The Soft Machine, The Ticket That Exploded, and Nova Express. William Burroughs employed words and sentences from different sources in order to defamiliarize them. Roddy Boyle's Barrytown Trilogy contains The Commitments, The Snapper, and The Van. It describes the story of Rabbit family and its struggles. Siegfried Sassoon composed a semi-autobiographical trilogy which comprises Memoirs of a Fox Hunting Man, Memoirs of an Infantry Officer, and Sherstone's Progress. The trilogy concerns with the life of George Sherston, a protagonist, who loves cricket and hunting. The trilogy is titled The Complete Memoirs of George Sherston and it was published in 1937. Evelyn Waugh wrote a trilogy comprising Sword of Humour, Officers and Gentlemen, and Unconditional Surrender. Sword of Humour was originally published as Men-at-Arms. It deals with the writer's experiences in Yugoslavia and Crete. Margaret Drabble's The Radiant Way, A National Curiosity, and The Gates of Ivory constitute a trilogy. It deals with the story of fortunes of three women and social and political upheavals in Britain. Robertson Davis, Canadian writer, produced 3 trilogies. Psalter Trilogy is a sequence of comedy of manners. It begins with Tempest Toast. Leaven of Malice and A Mixture of Frailties are the other 2 parts of the trilogy. Robertson Davis's Dutford Trilogy is a fictional autobiography, and it comprises Fifth Business, Manticore, and World of Wonders. The third trilogy begins with The Rebel Angels. The 2 parts What Bread in the Bone and The Lyre of Orpheus follow it. The trilogy is titled as Cornish Trilogy. Benjamin Disraeli produced a trilogy containing Coningsby, Sybil and Tancred. In Coningsby, Disraeli has expressed the view that the primary function of the crown is to govern justly and of the church to inspire. Sybil expresses the views of reform. And Tancred or the New Crusade deals with the clash between Christianity and Judaism. It tries to strengthen the faith in society. The Arabesque trilogy of John Grimwood comprises Pashazade, Effendi and Fellahin. Theodore Dreiser, American novelist, wrote a trilogy dealing with the story of a businessman, Frank Cowperwood. It comprises the works The Financier, The Titan, and The Stoic. The trilogy was published posthumously in 1947. John Rodrigo dos Passos employed fictional techniques in his trilogy. It comprises The 42nd Parallel, 1919, and The Big Money. The writer has commented upon American life in this work. Rites of Passage, Close Quarters, and Fire Down Below form a trilogy by William Golding. It is titled As to the Ends of the Earth. The trilogy is set in Napoleonic times. Patrick Hamilton's The London Trilogy is known as 20,000 Streets Under the Sky, deals with the story of Bob, a waiter, Jenny, a prostitute, and Ella, a barmaid. Peter Dickinson's The Changes trilogy contains The Weathermonger, Heartsease, and The Devil's Children. Jamila Gavin, Indian writer, produced the Surya trilogy, which comprises The Wheel of Surya, The Eye of the Horse, and The Track of the Wind. The trilogy describes a story of partition of India and its impact on the people. A Time of Gifts, Between the Woods and the Water and the Broken Road is the finest example of travel book which forms a trilogy by Patrick Fermor. The trilogy eulogized by writers. It deals with the story of the author's journey on foot across Europe. The third part of the trilogy is unfinished. Lewis Gibbon, pen name of James Mitchell, is famous for his trilogy as Scott Square. The trilogy contains Sunset Song, Cloud How and Grey Granite. It deals with the story of a girl, Chris Guthrie, and her conjugal life. It is important to note that all the 3 books were published under the name of Grassic Gibbon. Racing Sermon, Murmuring Judges, and The Absence of War are the 3 parts of a trilogy by David Hare. The 3 plays comment on the Church of England, British judicial system, and the Labour Party respectively. Robert Harris's Imperium, Lustrum and Dictator form the Cicero Trilogy. It deals with a story about the life of Cicero, the great Roman orator. The narrator of the trilogy is Tiro, Cicero's secretary. John Wayne composed a trilogy comprising the novels Where the Rivers Meet, Comedies, and Hungry Generations. The trilogy is set in Oxford. Leslie Hartley produced Eustace and Hilda trilogy. It comprises The Shrimp and the Anemone, The Sixth Heaven, and Eustace and Hilda. The trilogy is concerned with the relationship between a brother, Eustace, and his sister, Hilda. Wilson Harris composed the Carnival trilogy, which contains the novels Carnival, The Infinite Rehearsal, and The Four Banks of the River of Space. There is fine blending of history and mythology in the trilogy. Kazuo Ishiguro, Japanese novelist, produced a trilogy comprising A Pale View of Hills, An Artist of the Floating World, and The Remains of the Day. All the 3 books have different narrators. A Pale View of Hills is a story of a Japanese widow who migrates to England after bombing of Nagasaki. An Artist of the Floating World is a story of Japanese artist, and The Remains of the Day deals with a story of a butler who served a British aristocrat. Gwyneth Jones, science fiction writer, wrote the Aleutian Trilogy, which comprises White Queen, Phoenix Cafe, and North Wind. It deals with the question of gender and identity. Josephine Herbst's trilogy consists of Pity Is Not Enough, The Executioner, and Rope of Gold. Gary Armstrong produced a crime noir trilogy comprising Cradle Song, Siren Song and Swan Song. James Farrell's trilogy comprises Young Lonergan, The Young Manhood of Studs Lonergan, and Judgment Day. The trilogy describes a life story of Lonergan and his struggle. Nuruddin Farah, Somali novelist, wrote 3 trilogies. His first trilogy contains Sweet and Sour Milk, Sardines, and Close Sesame. Blood in the Sun, Maps, Gifts and Secrets comprise his second trilogy. The third trilogy consists of Territories, Links, and Knots. James Elroy produced a trilogy comprising Blood on the Moon, Because the Night, Suicide Hill. The readers can find a character of a detective, Lloyd Hopkins, in this trilogy. James Elroy's second trilogy begins with American Tabloid. It deals with American underworld. It was followed by The Cold 6000 and Blood's a Rover. Karel Capek wrote a trilogy containing Horrible, The Meteor, and Ordinary Life. All the 3 novels are realistic in nature. Peter Dickinson's The Changes trilogy contains The Weathermonger, Heartsease, and The Devil's Children. Jean-Paul Sartre's The Road to Freedom is an unfinished trilogy. It begins with The Age of Reason. The 2 other parts are The Reprieve, and Iron in the Soul. Mervyn Peake's Titus Scrone, Gormenghast, and Titus alone form a trilogy. It is a Gothic fantasy work. David Mercer produced a trilogy of television plays comprising Where the Difference Begins, A Climate of Fear, and The Birth of Private Man. The trilogy depicts the problems of political commitment. It is titled as The Generations. Frank Norris composed a trilogy called The Epic of Wheat, which contains The Octopus, The Pit and the Wolf. It is an unfinished work. Charles Peggy's trilogy comprises The Portico Mystery of the Second Virtue, The Mystery of the Holy Innocents, and Eve. John Moore produced the Brenshawn Trilogy. It contains Brenshawn Village, The Blue Field and Portrait of Elmbury. It describes the surroundings of Gloucestershire, Tewkesbury, and other villages. Naquib Mahfouz's trilogy contains Palace Walk, Palace of Desire, and Sugar Street. The trilogy made the writer famous. David Rabe's Sticks and Stones, The Basic Training of Pavlo Hummel and In the Boom Boom Room form a trilogy. Leah Walmsley produced a trilogy containing 3 Fevers, Phantom Lobster, and Sally Lunn. The trilogy sets on the North Yorkshire coast. The trilogy describes the story of the life of fishermen and their families. Forrest Reed's Tom Barber trilogy is prefaced by E. M. Forster. It contains Uncle Stephen, The Retreat and Young Man. Cormac McCarthy, American novelist, produced the Border trilogy. It begins with All the Pretty Horses, followed by The Crossing, and Cities of the Plain. The trilogy is set in Mexico and Texas. Anna Judith Kerr, German children writer, wrote her autobiographical account in her trilogy. It comprises When Hitler Stole Pink Rabbit, Out of Hitler Time and A Small Person Far Away. The trilogy describes the author's life experience in Paris and London. Martin McDonagh's Arran trilogy consists of The Cripple of Irishman, The Lieutenant of Inishmore, and The Banshees of Inisheer. The trilogy is a reflection on life. Alan Richards's The Marine Trilogy is an unfinished work. It comprises 2 parts and the third one is unfinished. They are Reynolds Point and Bark Whisper. Conrad Richter's Ohio Trilogy begins with the trees, followed by the fields, and the town. Friedrich Schiller's Wallenstein Trilogy begins with Wallenstein's camp, which is followed by the Piccolomini, and Wallenstein's death. The plays are partially based on historical events. Edwin Robinson wrote an Arthurian trilogy which contains Merlin, Lancelot and Tristram. The trilogy comprises long blank verse narrative. Thus, many writers have expressed their thoughts and feelings through their trilogies. Trilogies have become the fittest channel for all writers to give vent to their deep thoughts. Please subscribe Literature Guide.